In the northern reach of the Rhineland, where the fog lingers like forgotten breath and the earth smells always faintly of iron and ash, there once stood a monastery of grey stone and darker purpose. It bore no name that endured, and even the villagers below, mud-streaked and bowed by their own daily burdens, referred to it only as the house above the hill. Some said prayers echoed longer there, as if time itself recoiled within its walls. There, in the year of our Lord 1312, a monk named Brother Anselm was sealed within the wall of the west transept. He had been young once, and still was in count of years when the stone closed upon him, but old in the way of those who have seen too much and spoken too little. His crime was not of blood or flesh. No woman had tempted him, no gold passed through his fingers. His heresy was quieter. A question asked too softly, a doubt held too long. He had written, by candle and by moonlight, ideas not permitted. Not grand declarations, not rebellion. Just ideas. That God, perhaps, could be love more than law. That silence, too, was a kind of prayer. That the soul need not fear. The parchment was found. A novice betrayed him, though it is doubtful the boy ever understood what he had done. Whispers rose like smoke, and the abbot, a man carved of flint and frost, called it a cancer of thought. And so the stone was chosen, the ritual observed. To be immured was not a swift death. It was a return to the womb of the earth, without hope of birth. They gave him one meal of bread and wine. A final prayer. A kiss of peace he did not return. And then for monks, faces empty as unlit candles, lifted the trowel. One by one, bricks were laid where once a door had been. And in the hollow darkness behind, Brother Anselm sat with his back to the cold wall, knees drawn, listening to the slow approach of silence. He did not scream. The stone muffled all. His breath turned to vapor. Dust clung to his tongue. He tasted lime and mold and the bitterness of old incense. Outside, the world continued its indifferent turning, the bells rang for Compline, crows passed overhead in indifferent procession. He began to pray. Not with words, but with the rhythm of his pulse. It was the only sound that remained. Time thickened. Thought changed shape. He remembered the warmth of sunlight through stained glass, how it would dye the dust in colors no longer real, but lingering still in memory. He remembered a girl from the village, years ago, who had smiled at him without reason. He remembered the smell of rosemary in the cloister garden. The way the snow fell, without ambition or remorse. He began to feel that he was not buried, but becoming something else. That the walls did not close, but opened inward. That maybe God was not above, but within. Or maybe he was alone. In the dark, such distinctions fade. There is a moment, after sound ceases and sight dissolves, when the mind begins to fold upon itself. It does not shatter, it curls, like paper near a candle, silent in its retreat. Brother Anselm, within his narrow tomb, discovered this gently. Not with panic, not with rage. That would come later. First, there was the shape of silence. It was not absence, as he once believed. It had weight. It pressed on the skin. It seeped into the lungs. In the absence of bells, birds, breath, it became its own sound. A kind of low, humming grief. He lay on his side, knees drawn to chest, fingers resting on the old wooden crucifix they had let him keep. It smelled faintly of sweat and old oils. He had carved it himself years ago, in a winter when the river froze so thick the children danced upon it. That winter had felt endless. This one would be. The body does not forget the sun quickly. For hours, days, perhaps, his skin itched with the memory of warmth. He would twitch at ghosts of light on his cheek. His eyes, still open, searched the dark as though expecting a door to appear. They wept without permission. He counted heartbeats. He lost count. Somewhere beyond the wall, the world moved on. The abbot, having cleansed the air with incense and chant, returned to his heavy books. The novice who betrayed Anselm was sent to the scriptorium, where he copied psalms with fingers that trembled. No one spoke of what had been done. The wall bore no mark. Only a faint seam where the mortar had not yet dried. In time, even that faded. Inside, time had become viscous. It no longer moved in straight lines, but in pulses, in waves. Sleep came like a thief. Sudden, untrustworthy. Dreams were loud things. Vivid, glowing. He would see fields, absurdly green. His mother's hands. The stars. Then wake to the thudding reality of stone and stale breath. Sometimes he forgot where he was. Then remembered. It was the remembering that broke him. Not at once. But slowly. Like frost crawling into the roots of a tree. What is a man, without sky, he asked, aloud, to no one. The word startled him. He had not heard his own voice in days. It cracked like dry wood. He wept, not for fear, but for the sound. The shape of a voice in the void. He began to speak more, just to know he existed. Whispered hymns. Fragments of scripture. Even nonsense. Words were anchors. So long as language remained, he was not lost. And yet, something in him was slipping. The idea of time. The shape of his own hands. The purpose of breath. At some point, he laughed. It echoed strangely off the stones, then vanished. A memory returned, unbidden, a passage from Augustine, "Thou hast made us for thyself, O Lord, and our heart is restless until it rests in thee." But what of those whom men bury before they die? It was said in the old writings that solitude brings a man closer to God. But they did not mean this. Not this devouring black, this slow unmaking of the self. Not the silence that howls. Somewhere, Anselm could no longer say how near or how far, a bell rang. Once. Low, sonorous, like the groaning of the earth. It was not real, and he knew it. But his body remembered the sound. In his early days at the monastery, the bell had ordered their lives. Lords before dawn. Prime with the mist still clinging to the fields. Terce, sext, nun, each hour slicing the day like ritual bones. Vespers, at twilight. Carmpline, in hush. That ringing had once given structure, a scaffold for the soul. Now it haunted him, ringing only in the mind. He pressed his head against the stone, craving the vibration. There was nothing. The body is stubborn. It survives long after the spirit begins to dim. He ate what little had been given, a small crust of bread, dry and tasteless, and a skin of wine, gone sour in the damp. It stayed in his stomach like regret. The thirst came next. A dry tongue, cracked lips, the sourness of breath that turned upon itself. He tried to pray. But the prayers unraveled, words loosening in his mouth like threads pulled from a robe. Pater noster, qui es in caelis. He forgot the rest. Was this his penance, or his proof? If he did not believe fully, if he questioned, was this his just punishment? Or did the very cruelty of it prove that the men who punished him served not God, but their own fear? The darkness offered no answer. Only the sound of his own body, now his only congregation. The rasp of his breath. The slowing of his heart. The whisper of his bones shifting against the stone. There were moments, brief, crystalline, when he felt clarity. Not the warm clarity of revelation. But something colder. Sharper. He realized that the walls had not just closed him in, they had reflected him back. Without others, without books, without ritual, without doctrine, there was only himself. The barest root of the soul. And he did not know if he liked what he saw. He wept again. Not from fear, not this time. But from the simple fact that no one would know. No one would remember this sorrow. He would vanish without a name, without a tombstone. And the wall would stand, clean and quiet, long after his bones had turned to dust. Is that death? He wondered. Not the end of breath, but the end of witness? Outside, the winter winds came, and no one in the monastery spoke of the west transept. It was simply colder there, they said. A draught, perhaps. Nothing more. But one novice, the same who had betrayed him, sometimes paused beside that wall, as if listening. And though he never spoke of it, he began to write strange things in the margins of his manuscripts. Questions. Half-finished prayers. A name, once, quickly scratched out. There is a point where memory begins to unravel, not all at once, but in frayed threads, like a tapestry tugged too long by time. Brother Anselm had passed that point. It did not frighten him. Not anymore. He had forgotten his age, and his face. He remembered snow, vaguely. The way it softened the world. He remembered his mother's voice, though not the words. Only the shape of her lullabies, low and earthy, sung beside a fire that surely never existed. Names meant little. His own had become strange in his mouth, a sound worn thin. He whispered it once, Anselm, and it did not answer him. It hung in the air like a lie. More real than the past were the rhythms, the drip of moisture down the stone behind him, the creak of bone against rough robe, the soft clicking of his teeth when he dreamed and clenched his jaw too tight. His body, once an obedient vessel, had become an echo chamber. It trembled now without cause. It bled, slightly, from places he could not see. But pain no longer alarmed him. It was company. In moments of strange lucidity, he began to imagine the stone itself as living. Not hostile, but indifferent. A creature that had no need of time, no need of death. It did not hate him. It simply was. And in its being, it required nothing but stillness. Perhaps this, too, was God. He no longer feared death. He feared the delay. When one cannot see sky or candle, time ceases to move forward. It pools. Anselm drifted in it, like a leaf on stagnant water. Sometimes he sang, not words, but sounds, half-formed and trembling in the airless dark. Other times he spoke to the wall itself, naming it things. Brother Stone. Sister Cold. He told it stories. Mostly lies. He imagined lives he had not lived, sins he had not committed. He described sunrises he had never seen. It was not madness. Not exactly. It was his mind trying to survive where no mind should. It was hope, wearing a stranger's face. He spoke of freedom, not as escape, but as release. The freedom to dissolve. To be done. To join the quiet ground and feed the roots of a tree he would never see. He no longer asked for rescue. But sometimes, when the stillness became unbearable, he pressed his palm against the cold mortar and whispered. Remember me. Not to God. To the stone. By now, the walls had taken his scent. The damp had claimed his robe. His skin, once warm with blood and breath, had cooled into something foreign, no longer his, but part of the stone itself. Flesh softened, then stiffened. The joints ached less, because they moved less. Pain had passed beyond sensation, into the vague knowledge that it must still exist, somewhere. Brother Anselm no longer waited. That was the strange thing. Waiting implied expectation, and that had long since withered. Instead, he existed like a candle already burnt, still faintly warm at the base, still giving off the smell of smoke and wax, but without flame. He had forgotten how many days, or perhaps weeks, had passed. There was no more food. The last of the wine had dried at the edge of the skin, leaving only a bitter residue on his tongue. Hunger had once been a sharp, demanding thing. Now it was soft, a dull emptiness. Thirst was different. It pressed. It clawed. It made him dream of rivers he had never walked beside. He began to hallucinate, though the word would have meant nothing to him. He saw light where there was none, glowing veins of gold in the stone, eyes opening in the dark. He spoke with voices that answered from within his skull. One was his own. One was someone else. A voice that asked only once. Would you do it again? And the silence afterward was deeper than the question. He imagined God differently now. Not as a father. Not as a king. Not even as a judge, but as a single, endless breath, neither cruel nor kind. Simply there. Always. Listening. And perhaps that was all a soul needed, not forgiveness, not reward, but witness. He understood now why the desert fathers had gone to the rocks. Not to suffer, but to be unmade. To stand before the bare shape of being, stripped of comfort, stripped of certainty, and still say, I am. That was what remained. That was the slowest prayer. The one made without lips, without words, even without belief. Only the small pulse of being, saying again and again into the silence, I am. I am. I am. And then, less often. They say stone forgets nothing. But even the monastery, heavy with age and rain, seemed in time to forget the man it had devoured. The wall where Brother Anselm lay sealed grew colder in the winters, warmer in the summers. Dust gathered where the seam had been. A spider spun her silver net in the corner above it. No one disturbed her. No one disturbed that place at all. Years passed like a long breath drawn in and never released. The novice who had spoken his name grew into a monk with grey at his temples and shame deep in his eyes. He never spoke of the West transept. But on the anniversary of the sealing, he would leave a single lit candle by the stones. No one asked why. The abbot died in his sleep and was buried with a ring he had never worn. The world continued. And beneath the stone, Brother Anselm finally fell still. It was not death in the way they wrote of in the holy books. No angels. No demons. No final vision. It was more like mist, dissolving into the dark. Soft. Complete. His last thought was not of judgment, nor of fear. It was the memory of light passing through colored glass. The warmth on his hands. The dust in the air catching fire. That was all. Then, silence. Not the cruel silence of confinement, but the beautiful silence of being done. We do not know if his soul rose, or lingered, or faded. The church recorded no miracle. No relic was found. Only, many years later, when the monastery was abandoned and the walls crumbled beneath ivy and frost, a scholar noted the bones found behind the stone. They were curled. Peaceful. Undisturbed. And in the dust near what was once a hand, a piece of wood, weathered and soft, shaped into a crucifix. It bore no decoration. Only the faint groove where a thumb had passed over it, again and again, in the dark. It is not for us to say whether Anselm died in despair or in grace. The line between them is thinner than breath. But in his long dying, in the slow surrender of all things, body, mind, name, he became something rare. A soul that saw itself. And though no one comes to that hill now, and the monastery has long since returned to earth, the stones remember. Quietly. Faithfully. Without words. For not every martyr burns. Some are buried. And some are forgotten beautifully.